The room was filled with soft light, filtering through sheer curtains, casting a warm glow that made everything feel deceptively calm. Yet, as Mia placed her hand on her swollen belly, she could feel a weight inside her that was more than just the life growing within. It was the unrelenting pressure of reality closing in on her and her husband, David. They were about to bring a child into the world. But the future looked anything but certain. David, the love of her life, had always been a dreamer. When they first met, his eyes held a spark, a kind of passionate energy that made her believe in the impossible. But as the months wore on and their child's due date approached, Mia saw that spark waver. His once hopeful dreams of finding stable work had turned into a series of odd jobs and temporary contracts, each one ending with more broken promises than the last. Their savings dwindled. Every medical bill, every unexpected expense seemed to drain a bit more of their hope. Mia kept reminding herself that things would work out, that this was just a temporary storm. But deep down, a voice whispered doubts to her. How would they afford a safe home for their child? How could they secure a future when they barely made it through each month? Days turned into a routine of budgeting and cutting back, of watching their lives shrink to necessities alone. Mia found herself counting coins at the grocery store, eyes lingering on items she could no longer afford. David started coming home late, worn and defeated. A heavy silence settling over the dinner table as they both grappled with the unspoken fears clawing at their hearts. One night, as they lay in bed, Mia broke the silence. David, what if it doesn't get better? David stared at the ceiling, his voice a fragile whisper. Then we'll make it better. Mia, we don't have a choice. We're all this child will have. Despite the desperation that simmered between them, Mia clung to his words. They fueled her resolve, even as her body grew heavier and her anxiety grew sharper. She was carrying more than just a child, she was carrying the weight of a life they hadn't yet figured out how to live. As the months passed, Mia's maternity leave loomed. She had always been proud of her work, finding meaning and confidence in a job she had built from the ground up. But stepping away even temporarily felt like an impossible risk. She feared the world might move on without her, that her role would be filled by someone with less baggage, someone who didn't have to rush home at the end of the day. But her health, the baby's health, came first. So she let go, one day at a time, feeling like she was slipping away from herself with every step she took. It was as if her identity was being washed away, leaving her to wonder what remained. The day she went into labor, they rode in silence to the hospital, each consumed by fears too heavy to share. Hours later, when the cries of their newborn filled the room, Mia felt a fierce love surge through her, a love that somehow coexisted with the aching uncertainty that hadn't left her side. She looked into her child's eyes, feeling an unbreakable connection but also an unbreakable responsibility. That night, as she lay with her child sleeping by her side, Mia made a silent promise. No matter how dark things became, no matter how many nights she spent in doubt and fear, she would fight. She would find a way to secure a future for her family. She didn't know how yet, and she didn't know what it would cost. But she knew one thing with certainty: she would not allow her child to inherit her fears. The days that followed brought waves of sleepless nights, raw emotions, and countless moments of self-doubt. But within her was a fire that wouldn't burn out, a flicker of hope that grew with every small step forward. It was the beginning of her journey, a journey she didn't yet realize would test every ounce of her resilience, but one that would ultimately define who she was meant to be. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the small apartment, its golden rays flickering over walls that had seen their fair share of dreams and disappointments. Mia sat in silence, her hand resting on her stomach as she watched David pace back and forth across the room, muttering numbers under his breath. He'd been trying to make sense of their budget for the past hour. But the outcome was always the same: there simply wasn't enough. "Maybe I could pick up another shift," David said finally, breaking the silence. His voice held a desperation that Mia wasn't used to hearing. It was raw, almost pleading, and it twisted something deep inside her. "You're already working nights and weekends." "David," she replied softly. "When would you sleep?" He paused, running a hand through his hair, the stress visible in every tense line of his body. "I'll figure something out. We need this to work. Mia. For you. For the baby." Mia wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that everything would fall into place as he said. But her mind was plagued by thoughts of unpaid bills, of the baby's arrival just weeks away, of the daunting responsibility they were about to shoulder. She'd never felt so trapped before, caught between the life she wanted for her family and the harsh reality they were facing. As the days passed, Mia's maternity leave drew nearer. Her colleagues threw her a small farewell party on her last day at the office, and she tried to enjoy the moment, forcing herself to laugh and smile as she accepted their well wishes. But behind the facade, she was gripped by a gnawing fear. What if this was it? What if her career, her hard-earned accomplishments, ended here, in a haze of well-intentioned congratulations and reluctant goodbyes? That night, Mia lay awake beside David, her mind racing with the what-ifs that seemed to spiral endlessly. Her career had always been more than just a paycheck; it was a part of her identity, a source of pride and independence. She had worked her way up from nothing, breaking through glass ceilings and shattering stereotypes, determined to prove herself in a world that often underestimated her. But now, it felt like all that was slipping away. "I'm scared," she whispered into the darkness, her voice barely audible. David stirred beside her, reaching out to pull her into his arms. "We're going to be okay," he murmured, pressing his lips to her forehead. "I promise. Mia. We'll get through this." She wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words soothe the storm inside her. But the doubt lingered, an ever-present shadow that she couldn't quite shake. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations and last-minute expenses. Every trip to the store seemed to uncover a new item they needed, a new reminder of the life they were about to embark on. Mia did her best to focus on the positives, to allow herself moments of excitement as she folded tiny clothes and arranged them in the nursery. But the worry was never far from her mind. Each time she checked their bank balance, her heart sank a little lower. The numbers didn't lie; they were barely scraping by. And the baby hadn't even arrived yet. Then came the night when Mia went into labor. It was sudden. A sharp, unexpected pain that took her breath away. She clutched her stomach, a mix of fear and anticipation flooding through her as she realized what was happening. David was at her side in an instant, his face pale but determined as he helped her to the car. The drive to the hospital felt like a lifetime. David gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, glancing over at her every few seconds, his face a mask of worry. Mia tried to breathe through the contractions, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Was she ready for this? Were they ready for this? When they finally reached the hospital, everything became a blur of lights and voices, of doctors and nurses bustling around her as she was wheeled into a delivery room. David held her hand through it all, his grip firm and steady, anchoring her as the hours passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. And then, finally, it was over. A small, wailing bundle was placed in her arms, and all the fear, all the doubt, seemed to melt away in that instant. She gazed down at her child, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it took her breath away. For a moment, everything was perfect. But reality set back in quickly. The hospital bills. The long list of things the baby would need, each new responsibility weighed heavily on her. And then, as the days turned into weeks, she found herself struggling with a feeling she hadn't expected, a sense of loss. Mia had known that motherhood would be demanding, that it would require sacrifices. But she hadn't anticipated how isolating it would feel. She missed the structure of her workday, the challenges, the sense of accomplishment that came with each task she completed. The baby filled her days and nights, leaving little time for anything else. And as much as she loved her child, she couldn't help but feel a pang of envy when she saw other women returning to work, resuming the lives they had paused for a few short months. David did his best to support her, but he was struggling in his own way. His hours were long and unpredictable, and the stress of their financial situation weighed on him just as heavily as it did on her. They began to argue more frequently, the tension simmering beneath the surface of their lives finally bubbling over in moments of frustration and exhaustion. One evening, after an especially heated argument, Mia found herself sitting alone in the nursery, the baby asleep in her crib. She stared down at her hands, feeling the weight of her choices, of the life she had left behind. She had given so much to be here, to be a mother, and yet a part of her wondered if she had lost herself along the way. But as she looked at her sleeping child, a new resolve began to form within her. She had made sacrifices. Yes. But she wasn't ready to give up on herself. She would find a way to balance it all, to be the mother her child needed and the woman she wanted to be. The journey ahead was daunting, and she knew it would be filled with obstacles she couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of the determination that had once driven her to achieve so much. Mia rose from her seat, brushing away the tears that had gathered in her eyes. She wasn't defeated, not yet. She would fight for her family, for her dreams, for the life she knew they deserved. And as she looked down at her child, she made a silent promise. No matter how hard it got, she would keep going. She would keep fighting. For herself. For David. And for the tiny life that depended on her strength. The room was quiet in the stillness of the night. But Mia lay awake, her mind a torrent of anxious thoughts. David was asleep beside her, his face lined with stress even in slumber. The weight of their situation pressed down on her, growing heavier with each passing day. She felt as though they were trapped in an endless cycle of financial strain and fleeting hope, with each setback striking harder than the last. As her due date approached, the challenges only seemed to multiply. Unexpected expenses cropped up like weeds, choking the small patch of stability they had managed to cultivate. She and David had been scraping by, but with the cost of medical care, baby essentials, and rent looming over them, they were stretched to the breaking point. Each morning, she woke with a knot of dread in her stomach, wondering if today would be the day when everything finally came crashing down. Mia found herself pulling back from friends and family, unwilling to share the depths of their struggles. She hated the idea of being pitted, of having her loved ones look at her with concern or, worse, with doubt. She wanted to be strong. For herself. For David. And for their unborn child. But there were moments, late at night, when the silence became overwhelming, when the weight of her worries felt insurmountable. One evening, as she was folding the last of the baby clothes they had been gifted, David came home with slumped shoulders and a defeated expression. His attempts to find stable work had hit yet another dead end. Mia could see the disappointment etched into his features, the pain of feeling unable to provide for the family he had always dreamed of building. "I'm sorry," "Mia," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I feel like I'm failing you. Failing us." Mia reached out, taking his hand in hers, squeezing it with as much reassurance as she could muster. "You're not failing anyone, David. We're in this together. We'll get through it somehow." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. Would they get through it? Could they? The day finally came when Mia's labor began. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced. A fierce, unrelenting force that left her breathless and trembling. David was at her side, his grip on her hand unwavering, his whispered words of encouragement a lifeline in the storm. Hours passed in a blur. And at last, the cries of their newborn filled the room. In that moment, as she held her child for the first time, Mia felt an overwhelming surge of love. Every worry, every fear, faded into the background as she gazed down at the tiny face before her. Her heart swelled with a fierce protectiveness, a determination that felt as powerful as the labor that had brought her baby into the world. But as the days turned into weeks, the realities of parenthood set in, and the financial pressure they had tried to ignore came roaring back with renewed force. Hospital bills arrived in the mail, each one a stark reminder of the debt they were sinking deeper into. The cost of diapers, formula, and doctor's appointments quickly added up, pushing them further to the edge. David took on every odd job he could find, often working late into the night. Mia knew he was doing everything he could to support them, but the strain was taking its toll. His eyes grew more tired, his shoulders more slumped. The cheerful, optimistic man she had fallen in love with seemed to be fading, replaced by someone who was constantly weighed down by the burden of their circumstances. Mia's maternity leave was coming to an end, and she found herself caught in a terrible dilemma. Part of her longed to return to work, to reclaim the sense of purpose and accomplishment that had defined her before motherhood. But the thought of leaving her baby, of entrusting her precious child to someone else's care, filled her with a guilt that was impossible to ignore. One night, as she sat in the dim glow of the nursery, cradling her sleeping baby, Mia's mind raced with questions. Could she balance work and motherhood? Would she be able to pick up where she had left off in her career? Or had too much time passed? What if her colleagues saw her differently? As though her priorities had shifted? As though she no longer belonged? She looked down at her child, feeling the weight of her responsibility settle over her like a heavy blanket. She wanted to give her baby the best life possible, a life free from the constant worry that plagued her and David. But the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty, with no clear answers or guarantees. When she returned to work, the transition was as difficult as she had feared. Her coworkers greeted her warmly, but she could sense a subtle shift in the way they interacted with her. Meetings were scheduled without her, decisions made in her absence. She tried to keep up, to prove that she was just as capable and dedicated as before. But the demands of her job felt overwhelming after months away. There were days when she felt as though she was drowning, torn between her responsibilities at work and her longing to be with her child. Every time she left the office late, knowing she had missed another precious moment with her baby, a pang of guilt stabbed at her heart. And every time she had to rush out of a meeting to pick up her child from daycare, she felt the weight of judgment from her colleagues. The unspoken assumption that she was somehow less committed, less driven, than she had been before. But Mia refused to give up. She pushed herself harder, worked longer hours, determined to prove that she was still the ambitious, capable woman she had always been. She wanted to silence the doubts that whispered in her mind, to prove that she could have it all, the career she had fought so hard to build, the family she cherished, the future she dreamed of. Her journey was anything but easy. There were nights when she lay awake, exhausted and overwhelmed, wondering if she was making the right choices. She worried that she was missing out on irreplaceable moments with her child, that she was sacrificing too much in her quest to balance it all. And yet, through it all, a flicker of hope remained, a spark of resilience that refused to be extinguished. She was fighting not just for herself, but for her family, for the life she wanted to create. And though the road ahead was fraught with obstacles, she was determined to keep going, to keep pushing forward, no matter how difficult the journey became. In those quiet, solitary moments, when the weight of her responsibilities felt almost unbearable, Mia reminded herself of the promise she had made to her child that first night in the hospital. She would find a way to make it work, to build a future that was filled with love, stability, and opportunity. She didn't know how yet, didn't know what sacrifices would be required. But she knew one thing with unwavering certainty. She would not let her child inherit her fears. She would carve a path forward. No matter the cost, returning to work was like stepping into a different world. The bustling office Mia once knew now felt like unfamiliar territory, a place that had moved on without her. She sensed it in the way her colleagues looked at her, a subtle shift in their eyes, as though she'd become someone else, someone less dedicated, less capable. And yet, here she was, ready to reclaim the identity she'd built before motherhood, ready to prove that she was still the person she had always been. But as the days turned into weeks, Mia quickly realized that things had changed. Meetings were now scheduled without her input. Her opinions weren't solicited as often, and she found herself receiving less responsibility. The projects she'd once spearheaded were now managed by others, and any attempt she made to reassert herself was met with polite indifference. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating meeting in which her ideas had been politely brushed aside, Mia found herself at her desk, staring at her computer screen, her hands clenched into fists. She wanted to shout, to demand that her voice be heard. She had given so much to this job, to this company. And yet here she was, sidelined and overlooked. A quiet voice inside her whispered, "This isn't just about you, Mia. It's about everyone who comes after you." That thought stirred something deep within her, a reminder of the person she was, the person who had always fought for what she believed in. She took a deep breath, letting the frustration fuel her resolve. She would not be reduced to a shadow of herself. If she had to start over, she would do it with grace, with resilience, and with the unwavering belief that she deserved a place here. The challenges weren't confined to the workplace. At home, she felt the relentless pull of her responsibilities as a mother. Every missed milestone, every moment she wasn't there to witness, gnawed at her heart. The guilt weighed on her, a constant reminder of the sacrifices she was making. There were days when she felt as though she was failing in every aspect of her life, neither fully present as a mother nor respected as a professional. David was supportive, but he, too, was struggling. His hours had grown even longer, and the financial pressure continued to loom over them. There were evenings when they barely exchanged more than a few words, both too tired and drained to connect. The warmth they had once shared felt distant, replaced by a quiet, unspoken understanding that they were both just trying to survive. One evening, after putting her child to bed, Mia sat alone in the nursery, the soft glow of the nightlight casting a gentle warmth over the room. She looked around at the little things that filled the space, the tiny clothes, the stuffed animals, the crib that held so many dreams and hopes. She thought about the promises she had made, the determination that had carried her this far. And in that quiet moment, she made a decision: she would not give up, no matter how many obstacles she faced. She would find a way to carve out a space for herself, to reclaim her voice and her worth. With renewed resolve, Mia began to take small steps to regain her standing at work. She stayed late, prepared thoroughly for every meeting, and took on additional projects without being asked. She didn't just want to be seen, she wanted to be respected. And gradually, her colleagues began to notice. They started to ask for her input, to seek her guidance on projects. The path forward was anything but easy. But each small victory felt like a step closer to reclaiming the woman she had once been. Outside of work, Mia found herself connecting with other working mothers. Women who, like her, were struggling to balance the demands of career and family in a society that often seemed to punish them for trying to do both. They met in cafes and parks, sharing stories of sleepless nights, missed promotions, and the relentless pressure to do it all. These women became her lifeline, a source of support and understanding that reminded her she wasn't alone. It was in these conversations that Mia began to see the broader picture, the systemic challenges that so many women faced in the workforce. She heard stories of colleagues who had been passed over for promotions, of managers who questioned their commitment simply because they were mothers. She realized that her struggle was not just her own, it was a fight that countless women were waging every day. Fueled by this newfound perspective, Mia became more vocal about the need for change. She spoke up in meetings, advocated for more flexible policies, and worked to create a more inclusive environment for working parents. She knew that she was taking a risk, that her actions might not be well received by everyone. But she also knew that she was fighting for something bigger than herself. One afternoon, her manager called her into his office. Mia's heart raced as she took a seat, uncertain of what was about to happen. She had been more outspoken than usual lately, pushing for changes that she knew were necessary but controversial. To her surprise, her manager looked at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Mia," he began, "I've noticed the work you've been doing. Not just on your projects, but the way you're advocating for others. It's impressive. I won't pretend that we're ready to implement all of the changes you've suggested, but I think you're onto something." Mia felt a surge of relief and pride. This was the first real acknowledgement of her efforts, a glimmer of validation that she wasn't fighting in vain. Her manager continued, "We're considering creating a task force to explore ways to support working parents more effectively. I think you would be a great fit to lead it, if you're interested." It was a small victory, but to Mia, it felt monumental. She had fought to be heard, to make a difference, and now she was being given an opportunity to create lasting change, not just for herself, but for every woman who would come after her. That evening, as she walked home, Mia felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. She was exhausted, yes, but she was also filled with a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced countless challenges, had doubted herself more times than she could count, but she had persevered. And in doing so, she had begun to pave the way for a brighter future. Not just for herself, but for her family and for all those who would follow in her footsteps. When she reached home, David was waiting for her, a tired but proud smile on his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I'm proud of you, Mia," he whispered. "I don't know how you do it, but I'm proud of you." Mia felt tears prick her eyes, a mix of exhaustion and relief washing over her. She didn't have all the answers, and she knew that the journey was far from over. But in that moment, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that she was on the right path. As she held her child that night, she whispered her promise once more. With even greater conviction, she would keep fighting, keep pushing, not just for herself, but for the future she was determined to create. And as she watched her child's tiny chest rise and fall, she knew that every sacrifice, every struggle, had been worth it. This was just the beginning of her journey, a journey that would test her, that would challenge her, but that would also lead her to become the woman she was meant to be. Returning to work was a surreal experience for Mia. The office was the same as she remembered, the buzz of chatter, the clatter of keyboards, the familiar faces. But something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer the same person who had left months ago. And neither was her role. She felt a strange distance from the world she had once known so intimately, as though she were looking in from the outside. In her early days back, Mia noticed how often decisions were made without her input. Despite her previous track record, her superiors seemed almost indifferent to her presence. And her colleagues, though polite, had moved on, forming a new rhythm that no longer included her. She saw her ambitious younger coworker, Karen, now leading projects Mia herself had once overseen. It was a painful reminder of all she had left behind. But she gritted her teeth, determined to prove she still belonged. Determination pushed her to work longer hours, arriving early and staying late to catch up. Every project felt like a battle to re-establish herself. Every task a test of her resilience. But even as she worked tirelessly, her efforts often went unnoticed. Mia could feel the silent judgments whenever she had to excuse herself early for daycare pickups. And she knew the whispers that followed her absence. The weight of balancing motherhood and career was more challenging than she'd imagined, pulling her in two directions, neither of which seemed to accept her fully. And then there was David. His own work schedule was as unpredictable as ever. A patchwork of late shifts and weekend hours. The stress had worn him down. And Mia noticed how he spoke less of his dreams, his enthusiasm replaced by a grim resolve. Their conversations were brief and pragmatic, revolving around bills, schedules, and shared responsibilities. The closeness they'd once shared felt like a distant memory, replaced by the burdens of survival. One evening, after yet another exhausting day, Mia stayed up late scrolling through job postings. A flicker of hope mixed with despair. Her mind was crowded with thoughts of other opportunities, wondering if another workplace would see her value. But deep down, she knew her true goal was to stay, to reclaim her place. This job was not just a paycheck, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for. She couldn't walk away so easily. Then, as if by fate, she came across an article about a group of working mothers who had petitioned their company for flexible policies. The story struck a chord with her, igniting a spark that had dimmed in recent months. Why couldn't she push for change in her own workplace? Why couldn't she demand to be treated fairly, not just for herself, but for every woman facing the same uphill battle? The next day, Mia approached her manager with a proposal, outlining the need for better support for working parents. She suggested a pilot program for flexible hours, remote work options, and even an on-site childcare facility. The words poured out of her, carrying the weight of her experience, her frustrations, and her dreams of a workplace that embraced, not punished, parenthood. Her manager listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Mia, I understand where you're coming from," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But these are major changes. We'd need approval from the higher-ups. And frankly, I'm not sure the company is ready for that." Disappointment welled up in her. But she didn't let it show. She simply nodded, a quiet fire burning within her. She hadn't expected immediate success, but she was prepared to keep pushing. Over the following weeks, Mia continued to advocate for change. She scheduled meetings with other managers, gathered data on similar initiatives in other companies, and even organized informal sessions with her colleagues to gauge their support. Slowly, word spread about her efforts, and other working parents began to approach her, sharing their own struggles, their own desires for a more inclusive workplace. Mia's determination didn't go unnoticed. Some of her colleagues were inspired, seeing her fight for a cause that resonated with them. Others remained skeptical, dismissing her ideas as unrealistic. But Mia took it in stride. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose. A reminder of the woman she had once been, a woman unafraid to stand up for what she believed in. But the road was far from easy. There were days when the resistance felt insurmountable, when she questioned whether her efforts would ever bear fruit. Her manager's skepticism became more apparent, his comments laced with subtle hints that she should focus on her assigned tasks. There were moments when she felt isolated, as though she were fighting an invisible battle that no one else fully understood. One evening, exhausted and defeated, Mia confided in David. They sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the quiet apartment. She shared her fears, her doubts, the sense of inadequacy that gnawed at her every day. David reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You're doing something important, Mia," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but you're making a difference, and I'm proud of you." His words were like a balm, soothing the raw edges of her frustration. She squeezed his hand, a silent promise passing between them. They were in this together, no matter how difficult the journey became. Encouraged, Mia continued her fight. She used every resource at her disposal, drawing on connections, sharing her ideas in company-wide forums, and even securing a meeting with a senior executive. When the day of the meeting arrived, Mia felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She knew that this could be her chance to make a real impact, to push her ideas to the highest levels of the company. The executive listened attentively, his gaze fixed on her as she outlined her proposal. Mia spoke with passion, her words a reflection of the struggles she had faced, the sacrifices she had made. She explained the potential benefits not only for working parents but for the company as a whole: the increased retention, the boost in morale, the potential to attract top talent. When she finished, there was a brief silence. The executive leaned back in his chair, considering her words. "You make a compelling case, Mia," he said finally. "I'll take this under advisement. It may take time, but I think you've raised some important points." Relief flooded through her, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. She knew it wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start, a small victory in a long battle. In the months that followed, Mia's life remained a delicate balancing act, but she felt a newfound sense of purpose. She had become a voice for change, a leader not only in her department but in the company as a whole. Her colleagues began to look up to her, seeking her advice, her support. She was no longer the sideline employee, the forgotten professional struggling to prove herself. She had reclaimed her place, her worth, and her voice. One evening, as she held her child close, Mia reflected on how far she had come. The journey had been fraught with challenges, with moments of doubt and despair. But she had persevered. She had fought not only for herself but for a future that embraced women like her, women who were more than their roles, who were capable of both nurturing and leading, of giving and achieving. Mia whispered softly to her child, her voice filled with the strength she had rediscovered. "One day, you'll understand why I did this, why I had to keep fighting." And as she gazed down at her child's peaceful face, she knew that every struggle, every sacrifice, had been worth it. She was building a future, one step at a time, And she was proud of the legacy she was leaving behind. The changes Mia was fighting for took time, longer than she had hoped. Each meeting with management, each proposal for flexible work policies, felt like a small step forward in a much larger, uncertain journey. She had become something of a quiet revolutionary within her office. A person who was both respected and, at times, silently resented. It wasn't uncommon to hear whispers of colleagues who saw her efforts as disruptive or even unnecessary. But Mia stayed focused, refusing to let the naysayers deter her. Her evenings became a time of preparation and reflection, often spent drafting proposals, refining presentations, and reading about other companies that had made similar changes. She researched the impact of these policies on productivity and retention, gathering evidence that could strengthen her case. With each late night, each hour spent away from her family, her resolve grew. She knew the path wasn't easy, but the challenges only seemed to fuel her determination. Yet even as her professional life began to find a new rhythm, her personal life demanded more than she sometimes felt able to give. Mia struggled with the guilt of leaving her child at daycare, feeling the sting of each missed bedtime or milestone. On weekends, she tried to make up for lost time, planning small outings, trips to the park, and quiet moments with David. But the weight of her double life, the professional and the personal, grew heavier. David noticed the toll it was taking on her. Though he was supportive, he worried about how thin she was spreading herself. One night, as they were cleaning up after dinner, he pulled her aside, his expression gentle but serious. "Mia," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I'm proud of what you're doing. I know how important this is to you, and to so many other people. But, you need to take care of yourself too." Mia looked at him, a mixture of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. "I know, David. I can't stop. If I give up now, if I don't see this through, it'll feel like everything I've done was for nothing." David nodded, understanding. He reached out, pulling her into a hug, holding her close. "I'm with you. Just remember, you're not alone in this. We're in it together." His words brought a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. For so long, she had felt like she was carrying this weight by herself, like she was the only one who understood the stakes. But in that quiet moment, she felt a renewed sense of partnership with David, a reminder that they were a team. Over the next few months, Mia's role at work began to shift subtly. Her persistence and dedication had caught the attention of senior management, and she was asked to lead a focus group to explore the feasibility of implementing flexible policies within the company. It was a small victory, but to Mia, it was monumental, a chance to make real change, to transform the workplace not only for herself but for every parent who struggled to balance their professional and personal lives. She threw herself into the project, meeting with colleagues, gathering feedback, and drafting a detailed plan for what a flexible work program could look like. She spoke with mothers and fathers alike, hearing their stories, their challenges, their hopes. Each conversation reminded her of why she had started this journey in the first place. One afternoon, while presenting her findings to a group of executives, she felt a surge of nerves. She knew that this presentation could determine the fate of her efforts, that a single misstep could derail months of hard work. But as she stood before them, she found herself speaking with a confidence she hadn't felt in a long time. She shared her vision for a workplace that valued both productivity and well-being. A place where employees could thrive without sacrificing their personal lives. The executives listened intently, their expressions a mix of curiosity and consideration. When she finished, there was a brief silence, followed by a few questions. Mia answered each one with precision, drawing on the research she had done, the data she had collected, and the passion that drove her. As the meeting ended, one of the senior executives, a woman who had built her own career against considerable odds, pulled Mia aside. Her voice was low but warm. "Mia, I can see how much this means to you," she said, her gaze steady. "I want you to know that I'll do what I can to support you. Change isn't easy. But you've made a compelling case. Just be patient. This won't happen overnight." Mia felt a surge of gratitude and relief. She knew it wasn't a guarantee. But it was a step forward. A sign that her voice was being heard. In the following weeks, Mia began to see the ripple effects of her work. Small changes started to take shape. A few managers began offering remote work options on a trial basis, while others explored flexible scheduling for parents. It was a modest beginning, but it was proof that change was possible. And with each small victory, Mia felt a renewed sense of purpose. A validation that her efforts were making a difference. But the journey was far from over. As she continued her work, she encountered resistance from those who saw her ideas as disruptive or impractical. Some colleagues viewed her as overly ambitious, a troublemaker who was pushing boundaries that didn't need to be crossed. The subtle glances, the whispered conversations, the occasional dismissive comment, they all weighed on her, testing her resilience. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging meeting where her ideas had been met with skepticism, Mia found herself questioning everything. She sat alone in a quiet conference room, her mind racing with doubt. Was she really making a difference? Or was she just a thorn in the side of a company that would never truly change? In that moment of vulnerability, she received an unexpected message from a colleague, a young woman who had recently returned from maternity leave. The message was brief, but it filled Mia with a warmth that cut through her doubts. "Thank you for fighting for us. It means more than you know." The words lingered in her mind, a reminder of why she had started this journey. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every woman. Every parent who struggled to balance their dreams with their responsibilities. She was fighting for a future that valued both ambition and compassion. A world where no one had to choose between their career and their family. With renewed determination, Mia pressed on, navigating the challenges with a resilience that surprised even herself. She continued to advocate for change, meeting with management, refining her proposals, and building alliances. She knew that the road ahead was long, that there would be setbacks and obstacles. But she was prepared to face them all. At home, David became her anchor, a source of unwavering support and understanding. They found moments of peace amidst the chaos. Quiet evenings spent together. Laughter shared over simple dinners. A sense of unity that reminded Mia of what truly mattered. Their relationship had weathered storms, but it had emerged stronger. A testament to the love that had carried them through. And as Mia held her child in her arms each night, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. A quiet certainty that she was building something meaningful. Not just for herself, but for the future. She was creating a legacy of resilience and hope. A path that others could follow. One day, as she walked through the office, she overheard two young colleagues discussing her work. They spoke of her with admiration. As someone who had challenged the status quo, who had dared to believe that change was possible. It was a small moment, but it filled Mia with a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had become more than just an employee, she had become a symbol of possibility. A reminder that courage could spark transformation. The changes Mia had fought for took root slowly, but steadily. Over the following year, the company began to embrace her proposals. Flexible work schedules became more common, and a trial run of an on-site daycare program was established. Mia's persistence had paid off. And though the changes were gradual, they were undeniable. Her colleagues began to recognize her not only as a dedicated professional but as someone who had transformed the workplace, one policy at a time. As the workplace became more inclusive, Mia noticed a shift in the atmosphere around her. Parents who had once been reluctant to speak about their struggles were now more open, more willing to share their experiences and ideas. She had created an environment where people felt valued for who they were, not just for what they contributed. She had built a culture that allowed people to bring their full selves to work, something she had once believed was impossible. And yet, her journey was far from over. Mia's efforts had not only reshaped the company's policies but had also drawn the attention of industry leaders. She began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and panels about creating a supportive workplace culture. Her insights and experiences struck a chord with audiences, resonating with those who had felt the same struggles, the same pressure to choose between personal and professional fulfillment. In these moments, standing on stage, she saw the faces of people who were moved by her words. She could see their quiet nods, their tears, their expressions of hope. She spoke openly about her journey, the doubts, the sacrifices, and the resilience it had taken to reach this point. And she spoke of David, her partner who had stood by her side through it all, and her child, who had unknowingly fueled her fight for a better future. But as her influence grew, so did the challenges. Balancing her new responsibilities with her role as a mother and wife was not easy. There were times when she felt the familiar weight of guilt, times when she missed family dinners, her child's bedtime stories, the quiet moments with David. She struggled to find balance, to hold on to the life she had built while embracing the new opportunities before her. One evening, as she sat at her desk, the glow of her laptop screen casting shadows on her face, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The emails, the meetings, the expectations, it all felt overwhelming. She missed the simplicity of her old life, the time when her goals had been closer to home, when her world had been smaller, but also more manageable. In that moment, she realized that her journey wasn't just about success or recognition. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would endure long after she was gone. She didn't need to be everywhere, to say yes to every opportunity. She needed to focus on what mattered most, her family, her vision, and her commitment to creating a world where others could thrive as she had. With that clarity, Mia began to make changes. She turned down some speaking engagements, scaled back her commitments, and made time for the people who had always been there, David, her child, her closest friends. She found a rhythm that allowed her to pursue her dreams without sacrificing the life she cherished. And as she did, she noticed something remarkable. The more she focused on what truly mattered, the more fulfilled she became. She no longer felt the need to prove herself or to be everything to everyone. She had already achieved what she had set out to do. Her work, her family, her life, they were a testament to her resilience, her courage, and her unwavering belief in herself. One evening, as she walked through the office, she caught sight of Karen, her ambitious young colleague who had once seemed so distant. Karen approached her with a shy smile, her eyes filled with admiration. "Mia, I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you realize it, but you've changed everything for people like me. I used to think I'd have to choose between my career and my family, but you've shown me that I don't have to." Mia felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of fulfillment that words couldn't capture. She had done more than build a career, she had created a legacy, one that would inspire others long after she was gone. She had turned her struggles into strength, her doubts into determination, and her dreams into reality. As she left the office that day, she felt a deep sense of peace. She walked out into the evening air, the city lights twinkling around her, a reminder of the countless lives that were touched by her journey. She knew that her story wasn't just about her, it was about everyone who had faced the same challenges. Everyone who had been told they couldn't have it all. She returned home to find David and their child waiting for her, their faces lighting up as she walked through the door. She felt a surge of gratitude. A reminder that everything she had fought for, every sacrifice she had made, had been for them. That night, as she held her child close, she whispered softly, "One day, you'll understand why I did all this. And I hope you'll see that anything is possible. That you don't have to choose between your dreams and the people you love." Mia had achieved more than she had ever dreamed of. She had built a life of purpose, of impact, of meaning. And as she looked to the future, she knew that her journey was only just beginning. She had created a path for others to follow, a legacy that would endure, and a story that would inspire. Her journey had been long and difficult, but in the end, she had found what she had always been searching for, a life filled with love, purpose, and fulfillment. And as she closed her eyes that night, she felt a quiet, unshakable peace, knowing that she had given her all and created a world where others could do the same. Months passed, and Mia's life had transformed in ways she'd never imagined. Her work had sparked a ripple of change, not only in her own company but in others across the industry. Her ideas about flexible work policies, on-site childcare, and work-life balance became the foundation for new discussions. And her name grew synonymous with modern, compassionate leadership. But as her influence spread, Mia found herself at a new crossroads, questioning what it meant to have made it. She had gained respect, recognition, and, above all, a legacy. But with each accolade came new responsibilities. Balancing it all wasn't easy, especially as her child grew and began to notice her frequent absences. At home, the realities of her success became more tangible. David, ever supportive, had adjusted his own career to give her space to follow her dreams. But Mia could sense his longing to rekindle his own professional aspirations. Their relationship had weathered the storm, but she wanted more than just survival for them. She wanted joy and fulfillment for David, too. One evening, as they put their child to bed, Mia looked at David with a newfound clarity. "David, I want you to pursue your dreams now," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "You've held so much for us, supported me every step of the way. Let's find a way for you to do what you've always wanted." He looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and relief in his eyes. "I don't regret a single moment, Mia. But, you're right. There are things I want to achieve, things I want to build." They shared a long, understanding look, both feeling the weight of the sacrifices and support they had given each other. With David beginning his own venture, a small business he'd dreamed about for years, their roles evolved once more. Mia took a step back, balancing her influence with a renewed commitment to her family, navigating this fresh phase with a sense of wholeness she hadn't felt in a long time. Around this time, Mia received an unexpected invitation, an opportunity to write a book about her journey and vision for workplace equality. She hesitated. She had always spoken out, presented proposals, and pushed for change through action. But putting her thoughts and experiences down in a book felt different, daunting. One evening, she sat at her desk, staring at the blank document on her laptop. Her mind raced with memories of the struggles, the sleepless nights, the doubts, and the small triumphs that had led her here. Slowly, she began to write, pouring her heart onto the pages. recounting her journey, the obstacles she had faced, the sacrifices, the lessons learned, and the quiet moments of strength that had sustained her. Writing became a healing process, allowing Mia to reflect on how far she had come and to make sense of the sacrifices and triumphs in a way she hadn't before. She wove stories of other women and men she'd met, the unsung heroes balancing family and ambition, and the dreams they held in a world that often made them choose between the two. The book was a labor of love, and by the time it was complete, she felt as though she had given a part of herself to the world. When it was published, the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from readers across the country, working mothers, stay-at-home parents, young professionals, seasoned executives, all touched by her words, all inspired by her message of resilience and possibility. Her book tour was both exciting and exhausting. At each event, people would approach her, sharing stories of how her words had given them courage, how her journey had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. Young women spoke of how they no longer felt trapped between career and family. Older men thanked her for helping them understand their wives' challenges, and young men expressed hope for a workplace where they could support their own families more meaningfully. Mia found herself energized by these interactions, each conversation a reminder of why she had started this journey in the first place. But amid the excitement, she remained grounded. She made sure her weekends were family time, moments of laughter and connection with David and their child. She had built a world where she could finally balance work and life, not perfectly, but with a harmony she could live with. A year after the book's release, Mia received yet another opportunity, an invitation to work with policymakers in crafting legislation that would support working parents nationwide. It was a daunting proposal, but Mia knew that this was a chance to create lasting change, to expand her impact beyond individual workplaces and build a foundation that could support families across the country. Her work with policymakers was challenging. She encountered resistance from those who saw her ideas as impractical or costly. But Mia was no stranger to skepticism. She used the same resilience that had carried her through the early days of her career, the same strength that had helped her carve out her place in the corporate world. She brought data, testimonials, and a vision of a country where parents could thrive professionally and personally. Slowly, her vision gained traction. She watched as her work influenced policy discussions, and eventually, she saw pieces of legislation pass that would provide paid parental leave, flexible work options, and support for working parents across the nation. It was a monumental achievement, one that marked the culmination of years of tireless advocacy and determination. On the day the legislation passed, she received a call from Karen, her younger colleague who had once doubted her own ability to balance work and family. Karen was now a mother herself, thriving in a career Mia had once mentored her through. "Mia," she said, emotion thick in her voice, "I just wanted to say thank you. Because of you, I'm able to raise my child and pursue my career without having to choose between the two. You've made that possible. Not just for me, but for so many." Tears filled Mia's eyes as she listened, a profound sense of fulfillment washing over her. This was her legacy, a world where others could live, work, and dream freely, without the constraints that had once held her back. As she ended the call, Mia looked around her office, the place where her journey had begun all those years ago. She thought of the quiet struggles, the late nights, the moments of self-doubt. She thought of David and their child, of the countless sacrifices they had all made, and the strength they had found together. And she knew, deep down, that every challenge, every setback, had led her to this moment. That evening, she returned home, feeling a profound peace settle over her. She joined her family for dinner, laughing and sharing stories, feeling the warmth of their love surround her. Afterward, as she tucked her child into bed, she whispered a promise, a new one this time. May you always know that you are free to dream, to be whoever you want, without limits. Mia's journey had been about more than just her own success. It had been a journey to create a world where dreams could flourish alongside family, where strength was found in community, and where the sacrifices of one generation could pave the way for the next. As she drifted off to sleep that night, she felt a quiet, enduring joy, knowing that she had built something lasting. Her journey was far from over, but she had created a legacy that would live on in the lives of those she had touched, in the laws she had helped shape, and in the dreams of her child. And for Mia, that was more than enough in the quiet of her home. Mia often found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She could trace each step, each sacrifice, each struggle that had led her from being a hopeful, expectant mother unsure of her future, to the woman she was now, a leader, an advocate, a voice for change. Hers had been a journey of resilience and transformation. And looking back, she saw a path carved not just by ambition but by a commitment to make the world better for herself, her family, and countless others. In the beginning, Mia's life had been filled with uncertainties. She and David had faced financial instability, the pressures of balancing their young family, and the sacrifices that came with pursuing careers and raising a child. She remembered the anxiety of wondering if they would ever find their footing, if they could build the future they had dreamed of. But within those challenging times, Mia had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a resilience forged in the fires of adversity. Returning to work after maternity leave had been one of the hardest parts of her journey. She faced judgment and was met with doubt by colleagues and superiors who viewed her as less committed simply because she was now a mother. But she had not let their skepticism break her. Instead, she had turned those doubts into determination, showing up each day with renewed purpose, refusing to let her role as a mother limit her value or ambitions. When she realized that the struggles she faced were not unique but part of a broader issue affecting countless working parents, Mia found a new mission. She no longer fought solely for herself but for all the people who had to make impossible choices between their careers and their families. Her proposals for workplace flexibility, on-site childcare, and family-friendly policies were met with resistance. But Mia persisted. Her vision was one of inclusivity, of workplaces where ambition didn't mean sacrificing the most important parts of one's life. Her journey was marked by many moments of doubt, of feeling overwhelmed. Yet she pressed on. She became a mentor to her colleagues, a source of strength for other working parents who saw in her the possibility of a different way of working and living. She received recognition, invitations to speak, and eventually even the opportunity to publish her story. The book she wrote was a testament to her journey, a way of giving back, of encouraging others to pursue their dreams without fear of losing what mattered most. Mia's message resonated across the country, with her story inspiring others to see themselves not just as employees but as people whose lives held value beyond the workplace. Her book tour connected her with people from all walks of life, young professionals, stay-at-home parents, seasoned executives, each one touched by her words, each one finding a piece of themselves in her story. At home, she had navigated the delicate balance of supporting David as he pursued his dreams, ensuring their family remained strong amid the demands of her growing influence. She had learned, through trial and error, the importance of setting boundaries, of prioritizing the people who had been with her from the beginning. Her family was her anchor, her reminder of why she had begun this journey in the first place. Then came the opportunity to work on policy reform, to take her vision to the national level. She collaborated with lawmakers, sharing her insights and helping to shape legislation that would support working parents across the country. The day the policy passed was a crowning achievement in her career. A tangible reminder that her efforts had reached beyond the walls of her company. That she had left a mark on the world. As she looked back on her journey, Mia saw how each phase of her life had shaped her, the hopeful beginnings. The struggles of early motherhood. The fight to reclaim her place in the workforce. And the triumph of her advocacy. She had built a legacy that would endure. One that would inspire others to believe that a balanced life was possible. That family and ambition could coexist. Her journey had become more than just a story of personal success, it had become a blueprint for others to follow. A beacon of hope for those who felt torn between their dreams and their responsibilities. One evening, as she sat with David, watching their child play in the living room, Mia felt a profound sense of peace. She had accomplished so much. But more than that, she had created a world where her child, and the children of so many others, could dream without limits. She had paved the way for a new generation. A generation that would inherit not just a better workplace but a better world. In the end, Mia's journey was one of courage, resilience, and purpose. She had faced obstacles that could have easily discouraged her. But she had found within herself a strength that transcended those challenges. She had transformed her struggles into solutions, her setbacks into stepping stones, and her dreams into a reality that would continue to touch lives long after her journey ended. And as she sat in the warmth of her home, surrounded by the love of her family, Mia knew that she had fulfilled the promise she had once whispered to her newborn child. She had built a life not just of success, but of meaning, a life that had made a difference. Her journey was complete. But her legacy was just beginning.